Yeah, Jerry's got the announcements.
Yeah, just kept it everything.
Pretty good. How are you?
Good. Okay, well, good evening. I guess we'll kick things off and start. The topic that I was given tonight is on simplicity, and I'm very grateful for Josh inviting me back out here. Josh and I have such a great friendship that goes back. We were talking at dinner tonight. We started school 10 years ago this August, and it's crazy to think about how fast time moves and what all goes on through that. Josh and I, we weren't roommates in college, though we probably could have been with how much time that we're at each other's apartments. And now we're both entering into a new phase, a new chapter of our life. Both of our wives are pregnant. Natalie, my wife, is due October 1st. And then Madeline will be due just shortly thereafter. And so Josh and I look at each other sometimes and we think, what are we doing with our lives? And how has God blessed us so greatly in this? We certainly don't deserve either one of those, but we're grateful for God's providence and God's grace in showing us so much kindness and so much blessing. And I know that this congregation has been such a blessing for Josh too. Anytime that I'm able to talk to Josh about his ministry and his work, he just can't speak enough about how good that you all have been to him and his wife. And so I'm grateful to hear that Kingfisher just continues to be just this incredible source of love and comfort and encouragement to all those that are around here. We are going to be in the book of Ecclesiastes, so if you've got your Bibles, turn to the book of Ecclesiastes. When I sat down a few weeks ago and started kind of thinking through, okay, how do I take a topic such as simplicity and tie that into a biblical lesson, a lot of different things kind of came to my mind. Jesus, whenever he sent his disciples out, he would talk about how you are not to take with you food or clothing or any preparations. But Jesus did that so that they might rely on the church a little bit more. And that as they went out in their different ministries and as they went out to these different communities and talked to people, that these disciples could build those relationships through taking care of one another and helping one another and also providing for whatever they needed. I also thought about passages like 1 Timothy chapter 6. My mom always told me that whenever my room was messy, she always had, well, you know, Tyler, cleanliness is next to godliness. And eventually I wisened up and I said, actually, Mom, in 1 Timothy chapter 6, contentment is next to godliness. And you imagine that she didn't receive that too well. There were some consequences after kind of smarting off to her like that. But thinking about Paul, as he's writing to this young minister who has now taken on this ministry of reaching out to the Gentile people, of all the things that he's teaching him through 1 Timothy, don't let anyone look down on your youthfulness. Stay devoted to Scripture. Don't let anyone persuade you into other things of this life and other doctrines. And then there in 1 Timothy chapter 6, he has a pretty lengthy discourse of talking about the love of money and how the love of money is the root of all evil. Not money itself, but that passion, that desire to want more money can be a root of all evil. And certainly from my side of things, as being a young minister, there is that temptation. I joke with our college students all the time. By the way, my name is Tyler. I realize I didn't introduce myself. My name is Tyler. I work with the college students at North MacArthur Church of Christ, and we've got about 7 different universities that we work with out in Oklahoma City. But I tease them all the time that when I was welding, I decided that I wanted to make more money, so I went into ministry. And they all get a good laugh, I'm sure, as you do too. But as a young minister who left that type of lifestyle behind, and now being in ministry and not making as much as what I was in welding, there are those temptations of, man, am I doing the right thing? Am I providing for my family enough? Do I still have my talents and skills where I could leave ministry and go back to welding? And Paul would encourage Timothy that this love of money is dangerous. But then eventually my mind settled back at Ecclesiastes. We recently went through Ecclesiastes with our college students several months ago. It's almost been about a year. This fall it'll be a year. And Ecclesiastes was one of those books that I've read through before, and I've even studied before to some length. And I don't know if it was just the change for me and my wife moving out to Oklahoma that made the words of Ecclesiastes pop and resonate more with my life. But I seemingly couldn't get enough of this book. And I read it, and I studied it, and I taught it, and normally when I get done teaching a book, I go on to the next book, and I study and read and teach that one. And Ecclesiastes has always just been in the back of my mind. And especially when we look at this topic of simplicity, Solomon has some incredible things to say about living a simple life, and how simplicity can also play into our own spirituality. Sometimes I think that the reason why we don't grow spiritually is because we're too busy growing physically. And I think that when we get so concerned over our careers, or what we're going to do after our careers, or what life will look like in 5 years or 10 years, or what am I going to do with my time, that we give that so much effort and so much energy that when it comes to our own spirituality, we kind of compartmentalize that and create this spiritual bucket. And we say, okay, well, I'm going to read my Bible in the morning, and then I'm going to leave it there, and then I'm going to go carry on with the rest of my life and the rest of my day. When really, when you look at the New Testament, and one of the big things that the Jews got in trouble with in the Old Testament is that they were compartmentalizing their loyalness to God. That they would take their loyalty, put it on pause, go live wickedly over here, and then almost try and hit resume as if their spirituality was a movie. And God hated that. If you read the book of Isaiah, he opens up with this discourse of chapter 1 saying, your worship is vain to me. I hate your worship because you lift up hands that are filled with blood, because you are living a lifestyle that is so contrary to what God expected from them. And sometimes, I preached a sermon a few months ago that was, sometimes sin is not always the profane, sometimes sin is also in the mundane. That sometimes it's just our regular routine and getting stuck in the rut and trying to live life normally that we become distant from God. The Hebrew writer in Hebrews chapter 2 would give the encouragement, let us pay even closer attention to the message we've heard, lest we drift away. Spirituality and our Christianity takes effort. That's what makes it a struggle for us, is that it requires attention. It requires us pouring into it. And again, going back to that original point, that sometimes the reason why we're not growing spiritually is because we're too busy growing physically. So tonight I wanted to focus in on this idea of simplicity. And I wanted to show 5 reasons why minimizing areas in our life can play a huge role in our life spiritually. There's an incredible book written by a man named Greg McKeown, and he's from the United Kingdom, but in this book he talked about, if you can imagine with me, an illustration of a circle, and that circle is made up of different segments. It's not a complete circle, but it has breaks in it. And he says, this is kind of our energy. And what happens is, in this life is each of those segments kind of points out. And so you've kind of got this nucleus, and several of those different points are going different directions, and they're all separated. And he said, that's how our energy looks. But then with George McGowan in his book Essentialism, he says, if you can take all of those segments and line them up and direct them in one straight line, you'll have a lot more depth in that one line. His point being that we extend ourselves into so many different areas of life that we feel exhausted all the time. And it's because we've taken our energy and we've divided it into 10 or 15 different concentrations of life rather than focusing it down on the essentials of life. And George McGowan would say in his book that essentialism is kind of the recipe to not burning out. A lot of people in this life are burnt out, they're exhausted, they're overburdened, and it's mainly because we have become so involved in so many different things in this life. This idea of reasons why we need to minimize, I think, is what Solomon is going to hit at in chapter 5 of Ecclesiastes. So if you've got your Bible, Ecclesiastes chapter 5, we're going to start off with this first part, chapter 5 in verse 10. Solomon says, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This is also vanity." There's a certain aspect of whenever we aren't simple or minimalized in our life that we keep pursuing and chasing the greater thing. I realized this when I first moved out of my parents' house. I moved into an apartment in Denver, Colorado. It was the 3rd floor, no garage attached or anything. Well, still being a welder, I would do some welding on the side, and I was frustrated that I didn't have a garage. So I read through the lease, and I never found anything in the lease that said I could not weld in my apartment. And so I opened up my patio doors, and I realized that my dryer is hooked up to a 220 outlet. And so I moved the dryer out, and I pulled out the outlet for the dryer, and I moved my welder in, and I laid down, I was cautious of fire safety, put down some welding blankets, plugged my welder in, and started welding away. I kept flipping the breaker or tripping the breaker, and so I had to figure that out. But then I realized, okay, I can't keep welding in my apartment. People are going to be wondering why all this smoke is just coming out of my patio door. And so then when that lease was up, I realized it's time to move into a 1-bedroom, 1-car garage apartment. And I was thrilled to have a single-car garage. And so here I had my apartment, and it sat on top of this garage. And then I got into riding motorcycles. And then I realized, well, if I could work on cars too, then I could make a little extra money. And so then I had an old Mustang that was parked in the garage, and I had 4 motorcycles at one point, also in that garage, and then I realized, man, I don't have room for my welder. And so it was still this problem of, I don't have any room to weld because I filled up a 1-car garage. And so then I got married, and we had dual income with no kids and a dog, which, by the way, if you make an acronym of that, we're called DINKWADs. Dual income, no kids, with a dog, DINKWAD. And so we moved into a house, and I was thrilled because it had a 2-car garage. And so I moved in my Mustang. I had 3 motorcycles at the time. And then my wife said, hey, it'd be really nice if I could pull my car into the garage whenever it snows. Because we lived in Colorado, and nothing is worse than walking out at 5 a.m. and your car is covered in snow and you're running late and you've got to scrape it off and you've got to wait for it to heat up. So I, being a good husband, said, yes, you can park your car in the garage. Well, now, here I am, the same problem. And then I saw myself wanting a 3-car garage. And never got a 3-car garage, but the house that we live in now was previously owned by a high school shop teacher, and he was a blessing to me without even realizing it. He took out the back wall of the garage and extended it, so now that we just have an extra long 2-car garage, and you can fit a lot more in there. So I've got my welder, finally, still have the Mustang, no motorcycle, so I have plenty of room to weld now. I tell that story because that is kind of the pursuit of money, where how much is enough? I remember working as a delivery boy for a pizza company. I got my first paycheck and it was like $100. I thought, this is awesome. And I got my first paycheck as a welder. I thought, this is even more awesome. And then I kept looking at these pipeliners who were out working in North Dakota making tons of money. I looked at how much guys were making for underwater welding. And there's always that next step. Well, Solomon, who is basically king of the world at this point, as he's writing this, the Jews had risen up to such a great standard of the world. You still had other world powers that were in conflict, like Egypt and some of the neighboring countries, but at the time, Israel was quite the kingdom to be part of. And King Solomon is here at the top. He's got everything you could ever want. He's pursued everything that you could ever want to pursue. And yet he writes this: "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity." Now, if it were just me, Tyler King, as a minister on a minister's salary and said, the pursuit of money is worthless, you'd say, well, yeah, because, come on. But this is Solomon, king of the world, who had every possession he could ever want, who has had incredible riches. And yet he says, all this, you'll never have enough, you'll never be satisfied. And that's the scary part about trying to maximize our lives without maximizing our spirituality. This idea of minimizing some of the distractions of our life, when we think about money and possessions and simplifying and bringing down, we find satisfaction in the things that we have rather than trying to pursue the things that we don't have. Number two is you will find that your friendships will start to flourish when you start to minimize in your life. Verse 12 or verse 11, he says, "When goods increase, they increase who eat them. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes?" That's kind of clunky terminology when you look at the Hebrew grammar. The translators did a very good job. But that phrase, "when goods increase, they increase who eat them." His saying is, as you get more things in your life, more people will start to feed off of the things that you bring in. Listen, the reason why I'm friends with Josh is because he's just filthy rich. And so anytime that, I know you guys got a good kick out of that one. No, but when you are elevated to such a standard, it's hard to make authentic friendships, because you have to constantly wonder, are people my friend because of my status in life? Or are people my friend just because of who I am? You look at a lot of celebrities and they find themselves in positions where they are increasingly more lonely. Well, why is that? If you are one of the most famous people in the world, you wonder, why do people flock to me? Is it because they want to get to know me better, or is it simply because they just want part of what I have and the success that I've had? Growing up, I had a really good friend in elementary school. His name was Rutger, and his family was very well off, and my family was not. And you imagine, as an elementary kid, when you have your own birthday party and it consists of a cake and then those little string poppers that you pop out and confetti flies out, and that's a good time that when you go to your friend's house, whose pool is a hot tub, literally this massive 50-foot, probably by 40-foot pool that was actually a hot tub that literally lived on a mountain and overlooked the rest of the city, and this massive, huge house with spiral staircase, all made of marble. You go to that and they're renting stuntmen for the birthday party and everything else. It really makes those little string poppers not as exciting. And so I became very good friends with Rutger, and whatever music he listened to, I listened to. Wherever he went at recess, I went at recess. And eventually I grew up and I decided to have better friends. And so that's why I'm friends with Josh, is because, not because he has a lot of money, but because I like our friendship. But you think about, as you begin to minimalize and simplify your life, the friends that stick around when you're going through that process and the people who are closest to you, what you'll realize is a lot of them are friends or are family. Family doesn't require us to do great things for them to be impressed. We can just be family, and sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. But simplifying our life helps us in this. And Solomon would say, when goods increase, they increase with those who eat them. And so our friendships become more genuine as we simplify and minimize. Number 3 is that we find rest. In verse 12, you'll notice in chapter 5 of Ecclesiastes, he says, "Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep." There are times that I'm sure you can imagine or that you can remember in your life when you've had a full day of work and you come home and you find yourself in just this wonderful state of, I could sleep anywhere. And maybe it's a recliner in the living room. Maybe if it's sitting at the dinner table, and hopefully you can make it till bedtime, and then you sleep. And nothing feels better than when you wake up after a really good night's sleep. There's that rest. Well, Solomon plays into that, and you can imagine at this time, a lot of these kings, they would just sit and collect food and just have everyone pamper themselves. And I don't know if you've ever had just a very boring day where you feel like you haven't really accomplished much. And that night of sleep is not comparable to a night of sleep when you've worked hard and you're wore out and you're tired and you're able to go to bed and you have that rest. Well, Solomon talks about the same thing, that for those who try to accumulate as much as they can in this life, when all you're doing is feeding yourself, you really get sick more than you find rest. And that's the struggle that our world and our society lives in, is we want to try to accumulate as much as we can without doing a lot, without trying to work for it. I know my generation, and even the generation under me, there is this new fascination of how can we make as much money as possible with doing as little as possible. And that leads to being spoiled. I recently went back home to go see my nephew in Colorado, and my dad said, "Oh, he's got too many toys." I thought, wow, what a grouchy thing to say that someone's got too many toys. And that's when it kind of occurred to me that this word spoiled is not just a word that parents use because they don't want to buy another toy, but spoiled is literally when something is spoiled because of the environment that it's in. If you've ever grown produce, if you have one bad apple, it will make another bad apple. Things spoil when they sit out. Things spoil when they're not tended and cared to. Listen, adults are still spoiled. We just call it entitlement instead. We don't say that someone is spoiled. We would just rather say that they're entitled. When we have too many things occupying our lives, it really starts to affect who we are and how we function through this life. Number 4, and one that I wanted to spend a little bit of time on, is this idea as we keep on moving through Ecclesiastes chapter 5. He says, "There is a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. And he is a father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand." Verses 13 through 14, as we minimize and as we start to simplify our lives physically, we have a lot more security. One thing that I've realized is my parents were right in a few things, and that's a hard pill to swallow when you're a child. We never had super fancy cars. In fact, I remember the last car that I had while I was a child of my parent, well, I'm still a child of my parent, while I was in the house as a kid of my parents, we finally upgraded to one of those minivans that had the automatic sliding doors. And my dad, again, where I thought, wow, what a grouch. And then I turned out, well, he was actually probably right on that. He said, just another thing to break. Anytime that we would get something that had some sort of bells and whistles, he was always complaining, well, it's just one more thing to break. And sure enough, those doors quit working, and they were way less efficient than if you just had the normal sliding doors. If you've ever had a minivan with those sliding doors and they break, they're a pain when they're broken, if they even work anymore. Sometimes you just leave it shut, and we don't use that door anymore. Kind of put tape over the handles, and that stays where it's at. Solomon talks about this grievous evil. He puts extra emphasis on how wicked this is as we start to try to maximize our life, try to pursue all these different areas of life, try to accumulate as much as we can in this life and as many possessions as we can in this life. He says what happens is that those riches were lost in a bad venture. We start getting a little bit more bold, and we start getting a little bit more courageous with maybe investments or maybe affordability. It's crazy to me how expensive things have gotten over the last 10 years. And yet, we are still consumers. We complain about how expensive things are, and then we just go ahead and we keep buying things. We keep getting more and more bold and courageous about our investments and our possessions. And Solomon says it's a horrible danger and wicked when those things fail out, where you've saved some money and then it's gone. where it's a bad investment or poor investment. But when we minimize and when we have a grip and a handle over everything that we have, what happens is we have more security over those possessions because we're more aware of those things around us. Number 5 is that it eventually leads to better worship. And this is going to be kind of something that transitions all of this. So here's 5 reasons why we should minimize as a people, as an American culture. And this is so contrary to our culture today. But these are things that Solomon, as he experienced great wealth, as he experienced great popularity and great prosperity, he said, here are things that money will lead you down. They will never satisfy you. Money will never satisfy because it's never enough. But you can train yourself and you can rewire your brain to where you can say, no, this is enough. I can just start to learn how to live within my own means. You can find that those friendships can turn into artificial friendships as you gain success and popularity and fame and fortune and everything else that follows with that. You can find that you are restless if you have too much going on in your life. If you have too many possessions, if you have too many investments going on, it will rob you of your rest. And then kind of the last one that we looked at is the security that you will find yourself to be more weary of how investments are going because you have your hand in so many pots. But then, 5th, this one, I think, is, again, this whole idea that we spend too much time trying to maximize our physical life that we miss out on maximizing our spiritual lives. And you almost have to teeter and totter back and forth between the two. Because as one starts to drain, the other one starts to fill up. I tell people all the time, Colorado is such a difficult soil for reaching people with the gospel. Because Colorado is a very wealthy state. People who live there are usually well off in whatever field they're in. But then you also have the distractions around you of some of the beauty of the mountains and some of the beauty that money can buy you. That people felt like they were content in the physical realm and they had no need to engage with God or the blessings that He provides. When they read the blessings of the New Testament, they just weren't interested in because of the things that they had around them. And one of my friends, he became a missionary in Hawaii, and I thought, well, man, where was the sign-up sheet for that one? I missed that. I'm in Oklahoma. But he said Hawaii is an awful place to be a minister, because how do you convince someone who's already living in paradise that they need to pursue paradise, that they are already content there? So this last one is interesting because you almost have to work through everything in order to find yourself in a position to say, well, when I do minimize my life, I can have better worship. But this is actually where Solomon starts in chapter 5. So if you look at chapter 5, verse 1, he says, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know what they are doing, and that's evil. Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. Therefore let your words be few, for a dream comes with much busyness, and a fool's voice with many words. In the Second Temple period, what they did is each of the steps that led you up to the actual Temple Mount, where you would offer sacrifices and where you would offer your worship to God, they staggered the height and the depth of those stairs intentionally, and they were completely random. There was no rhyme or reason to how they staggered those stairs. It wasn't poor craftsmanship, and it wasn't because they were just trying to show boss man who's really boss and saying, wow, this doesn't fit up to code, let's just make them sloppy. But rather, the stairs were misaligned on purpose so that you had to physically look down at where you were stepping to gauge the next height of the step. And this was to force people to enter into the temple of God with their head bowed. And Solomon talks about guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know what they are doing is evil. There are a lot of people in this life who have compartmentalized their worship to only a Sunday morning, to where their worship is, I'm going to live my life one way Monday through Saturday, and I'll pop in on Wednesday, and I'll kind of get a little routine check, and then when it comes to Sunday morning, you better believe I'll be there, and I'm going to be living a good Christian life Sunday morning. And then when it happens on Monday, it's just a mad dash to how much can I possess, how much can I accumulate, what areas can I be associated in, rather than focusing on God. Well, when we look at this idea of better worship, number one is better worship reminds us where God resides. Paul would encourage the people in Colossae who are being persuaded by Greek influence and by hostile influences, set your mind on things above rather than the things of this world. Well, where is above? It's where God rests. And when our minds are set on the things of this world, we're not content. We're not satisfied. We find ourselves with poor friendships and relationships. We find ourselves insecure over our money and our finances. Well, Paul would say, quit. Right? Don't let others disqualify you from the grace of God. Don't let others pull you into their way of thinking. Rather, take your mind and literally set it up in heaven above where God sits. And sometimes I think we've lost our minds. Right? We use that term as in terms of people who don't have reason, who don't know what's going on. That person's lost his mind. But guys, this world has lost their minds. Because if it's not set in heaven, it's lost. It's down here in things that are fading and passing away. And Solomon says, that's futility. That goes away. Someone who's experienced it. Someone who knows what it's like to have great riches, but who's too old to actually enjoy them. So this is worthless. You work all your life and you have a bank account that you're now maybe kind of satisfied with. You still wish there was more in it. But now what? A great evil happens to man when he has to pass that riches down to the other person. And yet, when we worship, when we pray, when we praise, when we lift God up, and when we exalt Him, right? That whole idea of worship is to kiss toward, to prostrate oneself before God and to say, you are high and lifted up. It means that I am going to be the one who lifts God up and who claims Him as God. And when we find ourselves in that humble state, we remember that we're here on earth and God is in heaven. But number two, as we look at this idea of better worship, we remember where God resides, but also to remind ourselves of who you are. If you keep on reading with this, in verse 4 he says, when you vow a vow to God, do not delay in paying it, for He has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Let not your mouth lead you into sin, and do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your voice and destroy the work of your hands? For when dreams increase and words grow many, there is vanity, but God is the one you must fear. This idea that we've kind of looked at chapter 5, 1 through 3, but also looking at verses 4 through 7, there's this idea that I have to remember who I am in my worship. And I have to remember where I am in my worship. And the amazing thing about worshiping God and keeping Him as one who is ruler in all my relationships, right? You heard that vow come up many times. And in verse 7 he says, for when dreams increase and words grow many, there is vanity. But God is the one you must fear. Do you think that we live in a culture where dreams increase? Do you think that we live in a world where words grow many? And Solomon would say, unfortunately, what happens with that is vanity, is it's futile. Solomon in chapter 2 is going to talk about how there are so many things in this life that he's tried. He's tried to place his satisfaction in accomplishments. He became great. He was king over the world. He tried to place his contentment in the things that he was able to possess, all the riches and all the glories. He tried to place his contentment in the people around him, and all of these things failed. But he talks right here about God is the one you must fear. And when we have that true and better worship, then we remember who we are. And then kind of what we've already looked at in verse 4 through 7, he says to remind yourself of what you do, that all that you are doing is because you are carrying the name of God with you. Sometimes we have this tendency of moving away from a simple life in order that we can maximize our time here and really try to accumulate as much as we can. And again, that whole idea that, man, sometimes we really miss out on opportunities to grow spiritually whenever we try to maximize our lives here on earth physically. I have a very good friend who is a professional motocross racer. Again, I learned from my childhood ways and my elementary ways. I'm not friends with him just because he is a pro. I'm friends with him because he loves to study the Bible, and he invites us over to these Bible studies on Tuesday mornings at 6:30 a.m. And I'm not a morning person, but it's good for me, and it's a good discipline for me to get into. When I do wake up, Natalie can tell you that I'm not always awake at 6:30 in the morning. But when I do go to those Bible studies, and it just so happens that he's a professional motocross rider, and he has a very cool house and lots of cool dirt bikes on his wall and everything like that. But he told me, Tyler, it's so hard because I grew up in kind of unfortunate circumstances. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich. And he said, I learned how to work, and I learned what work ethic was, and I learned how to be a person through that character of working my way through. And he said, as my kids grow up, they're in a much different position, where they have everything that they could ever want totally accessible to them. And he said, I'm trying to figure out as a dad and as a husband, how do I limit the things that they have in order that they can develop and work and grow through that? And let me tell you, I think God has some of that same thinking in us. I would venture to guess that all of us may be in a position where we say, man, it would be nice if I was a little bit more well off. Or maybe you're looking at and you're saying, I'm very satisfied and I'm very content. I think that you are spiritually mature to develop that, but I think that there are still temptations where you look over and you see your neighbor over here who has something bigger and better than you do, and you desire that and you want that. Paul would talk about in 2 Corinthians 1. This is something we kind of went through a quick study of 2 Corinthians with our college kids. In 2 Corinthians 1, Paul said something that has really stuck with me, because it made me rethink about some of the positions that I'm in this life, and making me realize that life is not as bad as what I make it out to be. But Paul says that we were brought to a point of death. You think about being in ministry and you're trying to do the will of God, and you go over to Asia and you're a missionary over there, you're doing good things and you're converting people, and then all of a sudden you have this mass hostility come up against you and people are trying to kill you and stop you in any way possible. And yet maybe one of the things that runs through your mind is, God, I'm trying to do a good thing. Why are you not stopping these people from trying to kill us? We're getting death threats all the time. What's going on? In our American society, we'd say it's time to go move to a new work and leave those people behind. But Paul carries on and he says, we were brought to a point of death so that we would learn to rely on God and not our own. And I think that's powerful. While I may not receive death threats, while I may not receive people who are trying to destroy my ministry, at least that I'm aware of, maybe there are some out there, but there are positions that we get brought into in this life where we may be thinking, man, this is Satan really giving me a battle. But it also might be God saying, you need to rely on me a little bit more. I'm doing these things as a father who wants the best out of you. Again, I don't think being spoiled ends at a child. I think we just call it entitlement today for adults. But we live in this world and in this culture that we try to accumulate as much as we can. And sometimes when we don't get what we want, think about this, that God may be holding you back in order that you would grow closer to Him. And maybe He's holding you in a position that says, it's not your time. You couldn't handle that. We always take that passage in 1 Corinthians of God will not give you more than what you can handle in a negative way, in terms of saying like, well, God would never put me through horrible times. Does Paul say that? Paul says that God will never give you anything that you can't handle. And maybe some of those things are possessions. Maybe some of those things are prosperity. And it might be God holding you back from living a life of just unlimited prosperity because you can't handle it. And maybe God, as that father who's looking down saying, I don't want my child to be spoiled, is holding some things back from our lives. Let me give just a quick piece or a few pieces of advice as we kind of move through Ecclesiastes chapter 5, thinking in terms of Solomon. When you read, we're going to try and read the whole chapter. We're just kind of doing it out of order. But when you read verses 18 and following of chapter 5, he says this, behold what I have seen to be good and fitting. Okay, so Solomon has brought us up through this point where he said, hey, stop trying to create this massive account. Stop trying to create so many different things, which steps on my toes because I like having multiple hobbies and it's difficult for me to get rid of some things in my life. He says, behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment. Notice in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, a few days of his life that God has given him. For this is his lot. And you think about that God has given you your work, your talents, your skills, your abilities, even if it may be working at a McDonald's or being a CEO of a large company, God has given you that for you to find enjoyment in. And he says in verse 19, everyone who also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice, notice, in his toil. This is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. Sometimes we overlook the process of working in order to achieve what we're working for. And Solomon kind of flips the script and he says, how about you try enjoying the work, and then whenever you get those possessions, you can still enjoy those too. Solomon is not one who shies away from the idea that you can enjoy this life and that you can have many possessions in this life where you say, wow, this is such a blessing and I actually find myself enjoying life. That's not a sin. And sometimes as Christians, we may falter to that because we push this too extreme. Solomon never says that enjoying life is a sin. He says what is a danger is when you make that your priority. And when you make accumulating for yourself all these possessions a priority. But to usage of the word toil or labor, right? We don't use toil. I don't tell Natalie in the morning when I leave for the office, well, I'm off to toil again. But our work, our jobs, our labors, there are times where you may think, oh man, just going back to the old grindstone and just kind of working through these days and selling my soul to the company. But I promise you that God is giving you opportunities that you can find enjoyment in that. That, wow, I have hands that I can work with. I've got vision that I can see. I've got abilities that I have that God has blessed me with to work and use those things for work. And the crazy thing about that I think Solomon may or may not have intended is, if you think about, we spend minimum 40 hours a week at work. Probably more, because we're thinking about work, we're driving to work. There's a lot more associated to work than just the work itself. Let me tell you, if you are miserable in all of those 40 hours plus, it will drastically drag down your life. But if you can figure out and find ways to thank God for the things that are happening in your life that maybe you're overlooking, there's an opportunity there for you to find enjoyment and to find, this is what God has given me in my life. And I'm going to do that right now, and I'm going to thank God for it. And then when that next opportunity or that next possession pulls up, then I'm going to thank God for that, and I'm going to look back with this with such great thanksgiving. But that's all tied into this idea of the simple life, of living simply. Natalie will be the first one to tell you as well that I am one who always is a visionary. I'm looking at the next thing. And she's had to really wrangle me back and say, Tyler, we're here now. We're working here now. And enjoy this. And whenever she does wrangle me back, I'm thankful for that. Whenever I pray, I always try to include some form of the phrase, God, open my eyes to the blessings that I'm overlooking. Because I think in times where we think, man, I'm not as successful as that person. I don't have as much as that person. I don't even have as much as what I used to, right? Going from a welder to a minister. We can find ourselves kind of becoming curmudgeons of sorts. And yet, Solomon would say, realize what God is doing in your life right now. And what's amazing about being present in the moment is all of those other distractions seem to go away and we can simplify our life now. There's been several books written on minimalism and digital minimalism. And having read through a lot of those, having used a BlackBerry while everyone was using iPhones, I went back. I went to the Verizon store. I said, I want to trade this in, and I want to use this BlackBerry. And the guy looked at me like I had lost my mind. And I was like, no, actually, I found my mind. It's in heaven. But being someone who's gone through different phases of simplicity and minimalism, what I have found is that your spirituality benefits greatly from being simplified physically. We can minimalize in our digital world. I think right now we've got like 7 shows that we're in the middle of. We've got 7 different things going on, right? That's too much. And we just drag our way through those 7 shows. But if you focus in on one thing, your mind is more occupied on that one thing. Social media has teams of psychologists. I've read into this. I've met people who used to work at Facebook, and they would agree. There are psychologists who are trained to figure out the addictions of the human mind and how the human mind works on dopamine and how that creates more brain synapses or flows or highways that you are more drawn into that. They are trying their best efforts to get you drawn into their digital world. But when we minimalize our time spent with social media, our time engaged in social media, talking to one another, you'll find that there is a peace that comes from that. I'm not even sure that God intended us to know everything that was going on in the world around us. There are news articles and news videos that I see that are happening in countries that I can't even pronounce, and my heart weighs heavy for them. And when you have just this huge dump truck that pulls up and unloads everything that's happening, you get weighed down by it. Minimize digitally. Focus on what's happening in your community, in your culture, and focus on how God can work in that, but also your physical world. This is what we've been talking about. And when you minimize on your digital and physical world, what you'll realize is that your spiritual world starts to flourish even more. You find yourself engaged in prayer more. You find yourself engaged in worship more, paying attention to the words that we're singing, paying attention to the scriptures that are being brought out. Simplicity, while the world looks at it as just well, that would be nice one day, seems to be an essential for God and God's people. That we are to be people who have our mind set on things of heaven and not the things of this world. And when we engage ourselves in things of this world, we find ourselves in very dangerous situations. Not only do we find ourselves in a lot of futility, as Solomon would point out, but we find ourselves in hostile environments with our own minds. So I'm thankful for Solomon and his writings in Ecclesiastes, because let me tell you, if another preacher came up to me and said, "Oh, don't worry about money," I'd probably still be worried about money. But when I listen to someone like Solomon, who had it all, who was there on the top, and he says, "Listen, it's not as good as what everyone claims it to be. In fact, here are some dangers," I seem to pay attention a little bit more. So I'm thankful for your time, but I would like to close us out with a word of prayer. God, we're thankful to you for being our God. And Father, as difficult of a prayer as it might be, we're thankful for the times that you've held us back, that you haven't blessed us with things that we've asked for, that you haven't given us some of the possessions that we want or the opportunities that we want. Because Father, we realize that you are the one in control, and that you are God, and that you know better than all of us. And Father, we put our trust and our faith in you, and that you will help us along to grow spiritually more than we will grow physically. Father, I pray that you would open our eyes to see the blessings around us, that we may give you praise and thanks in those moments. That we as a people would become far more content with our current lifestyle, the things that we have in front of us, and that in that thanksgiving, that we may shine the light of your Son even more. God, I'm thankful for writings like Ecclesiastes that recalibrate us and that remind us that this world is fading so quickly, and that there are so many opportunities in this life to get caught up and distracted. But Father, I pray to you, and I thank you for all the ways that you are engaged in our lives, and that you remind us, and that you humble us and bring us back to a point that we realize that our home is in eternity, and that we're just strangers and visitors in this world. And we thank you so much for the things that you've provided for us to make things comfortable. We're grateful for the blessings that we do have that make this life even more enjoyable. Thank you for being a God who blesses, who shows mercy, who shows grace, but ultimately who leads us in ways that are righteous. And we pray all this in your Son's name. Amen.
out of it. I hope everybody did. Very good information. Just a couple things here. The singing seminar, 14th and 15th, that's this weekend at Hydro. If anybody wants to go to that, the bulletin board has a notice on there, all the particulars on that. No fellowship dinner this week or this month. We'll cancel that out for this month. And then donuts for Dad this Sunday at 8:30. So if you're Dad or if you're not, come and have a donut Sunday morning, 8:30 before church starts for Father's Day. And there'll be no family night in July. Let's remember in our circle of concern, of course, Sailor and many others in our bulletin. Please pray for those daily. Any updates on anything? I had one update on Dean Watson. His daughter called and said that they're going to put him in hospice care. So he's not doing real good, but there's a lot of benefits in hospice. They can help him with some things that he needs. So just continue to remember him. He wants us to pray for him as well. And if there's any others, let me know those updates. I'll try to update them and try to get everybody on the list that we need to talk about. Just remember them in our prayers. And let's see, I have a thank you card here. Dear church family, we cannot thank you enough for all of the support you have shared in helping us to prepare for life after graduation. Your gift giving was so much more than what we could ever imagine. Thanks again in Christian love, Braden and Camden Richardson. So thank you for that. Okay, anybody got anything else we need to bring up? Nobody? Okay.